The South African National Defence Force is in a financial crisis, threatening to destabilize Southern Africa's most powerful army. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered with me, Aldrin St-Pierre. The Auditor General's 2022 consolidated report has flagged numerous transactions running into billions of rands. These range from non-compliance, uneconomical procurement to insufficient use of resources. One of the irregularities concerned the purchase of the COVID-19 drug Hebron from Cuba. Tonight we ask, is South Africa's Defence Force on life support? Let's welcome to our panel this evening retired South African Army General Mudau, and via Zoom we're also joined by Kobus Maree, who is the DA Shadow Minister of Defence and Military Veterans. Maree is also a member of Parliament's Defence Oversight Committee, and he'll be joining us for this conversation. Remember that you can also be part of the conversation by going onto our social media pages. It is at Unfiltered SABC on Twitter. That's at Unfiltered SABC on Twitter. And on Facebook, just search for Unfiltered SABC. Good evening, General, for making time for us.
Good evening, Aldrin. Thank you a lot for inviting us.
I really appreciate that you've made time for us. And Kobus, thank you also for making time for us this evening. And let's start with you, Kobus. Would you say that, how would you describe the state that South Africa's National Defence Force is in currently?
Well, to put it very bluntly, it's first of all, good evening to you and your viewers and the General as well. To put it very mildly and very diplomatically, it is in a very precarious position in a situation. I think the Defence Force has been neglected over many, many years, not only financially, but in terms of other resources, and more specifically, political will, management will, to bring about changes, because we are confronted by economic situations primarily. The minister has many times said that South Africa must decide on the defence force they want. But there's obviously a difference between what you want and what you can afford. And unfortunately, everything is around money and affordability. And it is about the state of our economy. We've heard this week that the Minister of Finance has said about how weak the GDP is and the expectations of the GDP. And then obviously it comes into what are the priorities of government for a specific financial year. And especially, we must be pragmatic and realistic in a year where we are approaching a very, very important national provincial elections. Clearly, priorities for winning votes is most certainly not the Defence Force, unfortunately, and also military veterans. So we are in a very bad state. We have been, as I've said, neglected, and we have, deteriorated over many years to the extent that we are merely a shadow of, I think, what the Defence Force at one stage was.
Would you say the state that the South African National Defence Force is in also means that they're unable to fulfill their constitutional mandate, which is to defend and protect the Republic, its territorial integrity, and also its people?
Unfortunately, yes, it certainly means that. And I base that on not only my own observation and intelligence, but on the facts and the statistics and the information that was presented to us by the chief of the SANDF, the leaders of the different arms of services, and the realistic. I mean, we know how many of our prime mission equipment in terms of the Air Force are on the ground. We know that we have hardly any naval vessels on the sea. And the main reason always that is given to us is there's a lack of funds. We do not carry a stock of spare parts for maintenance of our prime mission equipment. And that means that more and more equipment is not what we classify as serviceable. And if it's not serviceable, you cannot comply with those constitutional mandates and prerequisites.
General Mudau, what's your assessment of the state of the South African National Defence Force, also considering that you were once the Chief of Intelligence?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important discussion. The SANDF and the other security forces are part of one of the most important pillars of our national security strategy. Now, if you start arguing money when it comes to the survival of the state, I think we are going it the wrong way. The Defense Force, as you have quoted, correctly quoted, it's supposed to defend and protect the Republic, its territorial integrity and its people. So this is an issue of survival. Now, you can't have us arguing money, perhaps just to go back a little bit to say, some years back in 1994, I think the budget of South Africa was far below a trillion.
The national budget?
Yes. Yeah. Today is over 1.5 trillion, around that. And we can't do things which we're capable of doing. I know people will argue inflation and other things, but it is not understandable. Why are we not able to take care of our own national security? That today South Africa has actually become a country which is known for lawlessness, crime, which is known for a defense force which walks in the street in camouflage uniforms, which are losing color. What are we saying about the image of the defense force? What do we say about an important element of a defense force having to have that credible deterrence against enemies? When our soldiers stay in barracks and merit quarters which are dilapidated, where you are talking about a defense force where the cars, their vehicles go on stacking on the road.
So who takes responsibility for that then?
To be very honest, let's put the blame where it belongs. It belongs to the government. The government has become itself a threat to national security.
How so? What do you mean by that?
If you actually make the defense force not to be able to have its prime mission equipment, not to be able to have its capacity to defend the nation. Here we are not talking about actually complicated things like going to fight a war. We are talking about the children in the Eastern Cape who are crossing rivers, going to school without a bridge. And this defense force cannot be called upon to put an ordinary Bailey bridge for our people to be able to cross the rivers. People cross those rivers with coffins on their shoulders. And the defense force was supposed to be able to. The defense force has got the people, but it doesn't have the equipment.
But isn't that the issue that Mr. Marais is raising now? Mr. Marais, if you can just quickly come in here, and that is around the socio-economic conditions that majority of South Africans find themselves under, where at the end of the day, what should be an infrastructure issue being dealt with by, let's say, for instance, the Municipal Infrastructure Fund and so forth, they can't and they don't do it, but there's an expectation that the military must then step in.
One must remember that primarily the domestic environment is not supposed to be the responsibility of the Defence Force. Defence Force is supposed to protect us from outside adversaries and threats, protect our borders, both maritime and land borders, and making sure that there's no threat on our lives and the integrity of our country. However, the military has always been ready to support the government's calls, for instance, to use our Defence Force engineering divisions to go and help and build bridges, and they've always been very successful. Unfortunately, I think, as the General has also alluded to, the priorities of government is not first and foremost the Defence Force and the protection of our country. So in other words, what happens when there's a regular deployment of our forces, whether it is Operation Chariot inside South Africa, or Vukela in Mozambique, or Ops Copper, or Corona, or Mistral. Unfortunately, most of the times, those deployments do not come with associated approved additional budgets. They approve an authority, an expense, and then the instruction is normally funded out of own sources. That means steal from Peter to pay Paul. And the more you do that, and the constant you do that, the further you are falling behind with your prime mission equipment. And if you do not that, remember, a defense force is supposed to be, as the general has said, a deterrent. It's like an insurance policy. People must be afraid to attack you. They must be afraid to oppose you because of your defense force power. Now, if it is known that we do not have vessels on the sea, if it is known that we do not have aircraft in the air, if it is known that we suffer with our landward equipment, then obviously that deterrent capability and effect, we are losing that. And then it means that bad actors will come into South Africa and they will do things. And when it is called upon the Defence Force to support the nation, they then find themselves in a position where they cannot fulfill their task. And then it's bad for the image of the Defence Force.
Okay, so when we come back, I'd like us to focus on the issue relating to the budget allocation. And this year, the minister, as Mr. Marais indicated as well, also increased the military budget by 3 billion. But is that really enough? And if you look at the allocation of the budget to various aspects of the military functions, for instance, defense intelligence, they are getting 1 billion, and this is down from 1.1 billion. So why would you want to compromise on your intelligence? That conversation when we come back. Welcome back to Unfiltered with me, Aldrin Simpier, in conversation with General Mudau as well as Kobus Marais, who is the DA Shadow Minister of Defence and also a member of the subcommittee, or the committee rather, on defence, joining us for this conversation. As we look at the state of the South African National Defence Force, do you believe that the South African National Defence Force is fit for purpose? Let's take a listen to some of the voice notes that you've sent through.
Personally, I think the historical downward trend in the defense allocation has not abated yet, which then points us to the demise of the defense industry and the continuous detriment of the South African defense force. The Minister of Defense and Military Veteran herself, Thandi Modise, highlighted that the South African Defense Force is hard-pressed to respond to critical events due to severe shortage of resources. I have listened to her speech when she said that their planning is now solely budget driven as opposed to being a mandate driven one. This alone says to us that it is now affecting their ability to deliver the constitutional mandate, which ultimately then compromises the successful conducting of military strategic missions in a sustainable manner.
The budget of the Department of Defense is extremely low. Equipment and infrastructure is not of world class, meaning combat readiness of the Defense Force is not on par nor up to date as compared to other countries. Considering technology has advanced and weaponry needs to also be of top class in case of war, border protection and peacekeeping missions. So according to me, there's still a lot that needs to be done, and there's a lot of changes that needs to take place in our defense force.
Well, thank you so much for those views. General Mudau, just a quick take on what was said there, which is something that you emphasized on as well, about the mandate being driven more by, it's more about the budget instead of the mandate that the SANDF has, and also speak to us about some of the lost capabilities that you think that the SANDF has lost.
Yes, I think it's correct to say the SANDF is now being treated like any other department. It is not being seen as a strategic institution of state, Now, if you look at what has happened to the SANDF of recent, you'll see that we have lost serious capabilities. Our biological and chemical warfare capabilities are zero.
Yeah.
You know, you alluded to the Hebron acquisition by the Defense Force. And the government itself was taking the Defense Force to task. It means this government doesn't understand that the Defense Force had facilities and laboratories which were actually involved in research in terms of fighting biological and chemical warfare. Now, today as we stand here, that biological...
But are you speaking pre-1994 or...?
After 1994, we created a lot of facilities. Of course, we built on some of the facilities which were there. But all of a sudden, these people have started thinking there is priority of, house building low-cost houses. But it's forgetting that a national security strategy must actually inform you. As you look at, as an intelligence officer, looking at the budget of South Africa, I can tell you I can't see what is the national security strategy. Because the configuration of the national security strategy, you can read it out of the budget. So what are the pillars of our national security strategy?
Yeah, but this conversation about the priorities is really nothing new. I remember even with the arms deal, saga, and the inquiry, the commission of inquiry into arms deal. The argument was there that back in 1997, 1998 also, the argument was around, do we build more houses, do we electrify more homes, or do we capacitate the army?
I was there during that time.
Yeah.
And I knew the Minister Modise was there. And one time he was very angry when the minister of, I think his minister was Trevor Manuel. He cut our budget by about 20 billion. The minister went there to the deputy president, Comrade Thabo Mbeki, and he got the 20 billion back.
So do we have ministers who have that ability to march into the finance minister's office and demand that there'll be increase?
You see, the first thing you must realize that today South Africa doesn't seem to have a national security strategy.
Yeah.
So everybody asks for any money, but there is no focusing on actually configuring your national security strategy in order to project power. The state must project power. Now, this state cannot project power because it doesn't balance the pillars of its strategy. And the Defense Force is an element where it must project force. And without projecting force, you cannot go and tell anybody anything.
Mr. Marais, could one of the reasons be also the concern that has been raised in the committee also around money disappearing from the South African National Defence Force, and the Auditor General, year out, year in, speaking about irregular and wasteful expenditure?
Unfortunately, I must admit, yes, I think it plays a major role. Remember, we had the 2015 Defence Review, which was, it is still supposed to be the only Defence Force policy of government. Now, National Treasury has to a large extent take those criteria, unfortunately applied on a total different budget environment. The division of a budget, according to the 2015 Defence Review and National Treasury, is that you must spend 40% on cost of employees, you must spend 30% on training and deployment, in other words, operations, and then you must spend 30% on maintenance, upgrades, and new capital acquisitions.
Cost of employees
the
is at 61%.
Thing where we are. Pardon?
Cost of employees is at 61% of budget.
Well, in fact, In fact, where we are standing, that is in terms of the budget, but in terms of actual spending, we are at 70% cost of employees of the budget. And with all the training and the deployments that I've mentioned right in the beginning, it means that basically 20% are taken up by that, which means that there are basically no money left for maintenance, upgrades, and capital acquisitions of prime mission equipment. Now, the challenge is, how do you correct that?
Okay,
the global benchmark
just hold on to that thought. Hold on to that thought. We'll come back around what the solution can be. And remember that we're also taking your comments at Unfiltered SABC on Twitter and also at Unfiltered SABC on Facebook. That's where you can find us, and we'd love to hear from you as well. The conversation continues when we come back and trying to chart a way forward around what the possible solutions could be. And welcome back. Let's get some closing remarks here from our panel this evening. Mr. Marais, I want to quickly pick up on the solutions that you were heading towards.
Well, there's a number of solutions. First of all, if you start with the threats that we've got, we are still to a very large extent based on the structures of the pre-94 and immediately after integration. What we will have to do is to admit that we don't need all the prime mission resources that we have inherited. So we will have to go and replan, reprioritize, and then look at our resources for going forward. Our defense force is based on what happened in the past, and we will have to accept the fact that our adversaries work with fourth generation and fifth generation technologies. We cannot stay in the age of analog. We will have to go and meet them and be better at that. So my opinion is we will, after that reprioritization and restructuring, we must try to increase our current budget allocation of 0.67% of GDP to about 1% of GDP. That means that will bring us another 15 billion rands to 20 billion rand at the current where we are at the moment. But we will have to look at the threats of the future. We will have to look at technology as a force multiplier, cyber technology, satellite technology, so that we can have a new way of protecting our country. We must have a 24/7 surveillance of our land and maritime border areas so that we can have a reactionary force to go and respond to any threats that we are picking up. Currently, we cannot do that. And then obviously there must be a political and, very importantly, a management will and knowledge and expertise, irrespective of political affiliation, because we must rebuild the defense force. And we can do that because we need a defense force. We cannot afford losing our naval capabilities to become a water wing, or our air force capabilities, the second oldest air force in the world, to only be an air wing. That'll be disastrous, and it will be an embarrassment to South Africa.
General Mutau, from your end, some of the solutions?
I think they are very direct solutions to solve this problem. One is that you need a capable government which is going to address these issues. We have created a civilian component of the Department of Defense, which is actually consuming a lot of resources, where things which were done by military people, because...
Do you think that's the reason why we have 61%?
We have. That is a very serious part of the problem. That we have got a civilian, we have got 2 DGs in defense. Multiple of DDGs from civilian and military. The financial officer of the military was supposed to be a uniformed person. Now you have got a civilian also. The same stuff. So you must start there. Secondly, the commitment, as Samaras said, the standard, the world, even Germany, is moving to 2% of the GDP. Of the GDP. To fund defense.
Isn't NATO's recommendation 1%?
NATO's recommendation, we are solving serious problem which have occurred. We need to bite the bullet. NATO is talking about modernizing where they are. And the structure of NATO is not like ours. NATO doesn't have civilians running all over the show. You know?
General Mutau, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate that you've made time for us, taken time out of your retirement to come and have this conversation with us. Really appreciate it. And Mr. Mare, really appreciate your time as well. We've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for choosing SABC 3 Unfiltered with me, Aldrin Simpier. We're back again next week, Monday, same time, same place, right here on S3. Totsins, enjoy the rest of your evening.